Hi, we're going to talk about our global natural resources outlook and in particular how tariffs are impacting that overview. I think broadly, the biggest impact from tariffs is going to be on global economic growth. And we think that is probably the thing that's impacting commodities the most with regards to the risk and the variability that we're seeing every day. And that, of course, if it leads to slower growth, it's going to lead to slower demand for commodities. So as that impacts us, we'll see how that plays out. But again, we've seen this before. It's probably, if there's a slowdown in economic growth, it's something that all the commodity manufacturers and producers have seen before, recently have seen this before, and will be ready to respond to it. Yeah, steel and aluminum for sure is interesting. Depends on kind of where you're located. I think the U.S. steel producers have benefited already from that, even though we haven't seen those tariffs 100% yet being applied. But if you're a U.S. producer, you've already raised price, you've already charged price, you're seeing the impact of that. Now, if you're outside, if you're in Canada, if you're in Mexico, perhaps in Europe, they're going to have probably a negative impact. That's steel. On aluminum, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. We see that in the U.S., we're pretty self-reliant on aluminum. There's very little that's imported, and even if it's 10 or 15% of imports get hit with a tariff, it's kind of a small amount on the overall picture. Other commodities, energy is a small amount. We see a 10% hit on Canadian or Mexican energy imports as kind of something that we deal with almost every day, if not more often intraday. But 10% is really, really not that big a deal. We've already seen prices come down, say 15% since the inauguration of the president. And you see the impact in terms of well cost or the cost overall, the overall industry. It's just it's a matter of percentage points. And again, something that we deal with very easily. Probably the biggest impact is going to be on the ag and ag products side. That's still yet to be seen. We have tariffs on imported goods from China. They have retaliatory reciprocal tariffs on ag products. That's probably going to impact U.S. farmers quite a bit. Yet to be seen. We don't see it in the data yet, but it's likely and it's worrisome for them. Haven't really seen any changes in fundamental outlook because of tariffs. The volatility and the uncertainty certainly sends everybody into a different phase, and you need to start scenario planning around that. So we haven't seen any really fundamental changes, but as soon as the tariffs come into effect and there's some clarity around that, you're going to see some meaningful changes with regards to financial performance. That can be obviously lower and or higher margins in financial outlook. So we'll see what happens, but we haven't seen anything real significant yet. This is, again, an exogenous event that just layers on top of many, many negative headwinds facing the commodity industry. In fact, probably you put all of them together, the biggest set of negative headwinds that I've seen in my career. Just, again, tariffs. You think about Ukraine and Russia, you think about the Middle East, the Houthis, Iran, Venezuela, OPEC Plus. You put all that together, and that's pretty tough outlook for commodities and energy in particular. But on the other hand, you have continued and somewhat relentless incentives and stimulus coming out of China. You now have a new set of stimulus programs coming out of Europe, and maybe there's the economic downturn, or there isn't an economic downturn, or it's not as bad as people think it's going to be. And you put all that together and you go, well, it's pretty resilient with regards to commodities. And we're seeing that in just about every commodity price, except for maybe crude, which you could say has reacted before a tariff risk. The other commodity prices are actually pretty strong. You have very strong copper prices. You have, of course, record high gold prices. You look at even soft commodities, agricultural commodities, they're doing okay. They're not doing great, but they're doing okay. So the resilience in front of, or in the face of all this negative headwind is pretty impressive, which relates back to the overall supply picture for most commodities, which is, as we've talked about many times, is quite tight. I think in the face of the uncertainty that sits there with tariffs, we're still really looking at some of the long-term value-creating stories that sit out there instead of being too incredibly tactical. Where we're really somewhat tactical, I would say, is trying to get away from the oil exposure, which isn't entirely tariff related, and putting more towards U.S. natural gas. And then we've added a little bit of steel exposure. So you can call that as tactical, but also there's underlying idiosyncratic reasons for those positions.